Okay guys, so welcome back to the YouTube channel. In this video we're going to go through how to set your bike up for enduro racing. We're going to run through the setup of the bike, not talk too much about components. We're going to talk a bit about the stuff I would take around an enduro race, and then as well the toll it actually takes on your bike, because these things do get pretty beaten up, so we'll touch upon that as well. Okay, so I'll talk a bit about suspension. So when it comes to enduro racing, I like to set my suspension up a little bit softer than usual, generally just because the longer stages that you're racing, it's not like a downhill race, so you want to set your bike up so it's going to be, working at its best front and rear shock when you are in a fatigued state. And obviously if you set your bike up like you normally would, say, for a downhill bike, these things when you're fatigued are going to feel like really stiff, and that's not what we want. We want these things to feel plush when we're going to be fatigued, because we're going to be riding stages that could be 5-10 minutes long, so we want to feel comfortable while we're on the bike. With the forks, I'm currently running a Fox 36, and these are 170mm, and we've got, I think, about 74 psi on these forks with one token. Ramps up nicely. Rear shock, I'm running about 180 psi, and I weigh about 80 kilos. I run the rear shock fairly fast, just because I want it to rebound for some of the rougher stuff. Like we're currently coming into the two races in Italy, which are going to be quite dusty, quite rocky, quite skittery, I guess. So I want suspension to rebound and and be there when I need it. Okay, so we'll talk about wheel setup for enduro racing. We've got 29er front and rear. We're not doing mullet or anything like that, so we're just having a bit of a joke now. I was getting rear and front tyres mixed up. Anyway, 29er front. We're running rim pack tyre inserts front and rear, just for added protection. We've also got pretty much downhill tyres on the front and rear as well. So we've got a WTB Judge on the back and the WTB Verdicts on the front. Some people argue that they would run lighter tyres just because it's, you're slogging a bike around these big days of enduro. I literally prefer to set my bike up just so it will get around the weekend, like I said before. So these tyres are the thicker casing tyres, so thicker sidewalls, just a thicker overall tyre, solid rubber. Inserts, again, like some people don't like them because of the way they make the bike feel, and as well, they're not the easiest things to get on your bike. So when you're putting them on, there's a question that, well, if you do slash a tyre in a race, are you going to be able to get the tyre off to put a spare tube in? Some will argue yes, some will argue it's going to be game over. But obviously that's why we carry some spares, which I'll get to later on when I talk about what I take with me. So we talk a bit about brakes now. So we've got TRP brakes front and rear. We've run in just 200mm or 203mm rotors on the front and the back of the bike, just for good stopping power. If we talk about the brake pads, I'm just literally running sintered brake pads. So we've got like semi-metallic brake pads, so they last a bit longer. They weren't the greatest brake pads last weekend in Zermatt when we raced. They, I suppose with the wet conditions we raced in last weekend, I'd be questioning whether resin pads or semi-metallic pads would there be much difference in between the two, because the amount of water that was going through and the amount of mud in the brakes. But because we were prepping the bike now for the two hopefully dusty races in Italy, I've just gone for semi-metal brake pads because I think they'll be sweet. Cranks, we're running 170mm length cranks. Some people like to run longer or shorter crank arms. 170 is pretty much just what I've got used to. We're also running clip pedals as well, so we've got Shimano DX pedals, so it's got like a nice platform on the pedal, so it almost feels a little bit like a flat pedal, just to give a bit more support when you're riding some of the rougher downhill stages. Some people prefer to run like more lighter weight cross-country pedals, but I prefer to try and make my bike as burly as I can and comfortable for the steeper, rougher stuff. If we talk a bit about the cockpit setup for how I like my bike for racing, we have a 50mm stem, and we have 760mm wide handlebars with 20mm rise nuke-proof carbon bars. I've been playing around with different materials, so we've been playing around with 38mm rise aluminium bars and 20mm carbon bars. I think they feel a lot different, especially out in Morzine on the rougher stuff. You can definitely feel a lot more feedback through carbon bars because they're a lot stiffer. And obviously 760mm wide is just kind of like my go-to width because I feel kind of comfortable like that. I used to run the bars actually at 750, so a little bit narrower. Some people run the handlebars at like 800, a little bit wider, but I feel if I run my bars that wide or 800s, that it's too wide for my shoulders, and then it feels like I'm nowhere near as stable as I would be with these 760s. And then if we move on to the angle of my brakes, how I run them, so kind of not like steep, but they're not like motocross style flat, kind of just nicely in the middle. I have tried running the brakes flat before, but I feel it's kind of like gets to a point where it's almost like unnatural on my wrists, so kind of just like a nice comfortable position where literally my hands just fall on the bars, and that's where I kind of sit. These brakes actually need a bleed before we go racing, but I usually quite like to have my brakes so they bite quite, the biting point is fairly close to where you pull the lever, so there's not much play at all. At the minute these are running quite far in, as you can see, but I like to literally have it so they bite a couple of millimeters pulling the lever, just because it's like a comfort thing. It's literally like there, I'd like them to pull that. So we'll bleed those brakes and they'll be feeling sweet for racing. And another little addition as well, trying to make the bike as quiet as possible as well, so just trying to neaten up these cables at the front here. And we've got these cool little rubber twizzly things that go around your cables just so it stops any damage to your frame. Just keeps things tidy and quiet, I guess. Grips, so we've got WTB grips. These are fairly narrow grips than what I'm used to, so I'm trying something a little bit different out. I usually like quite fat grips, but I'm just trying some narrow grips out for now. These are waffle grips actually, that's what they're called, waffle grips. We're also running the Mudhugger mudguard, so this is the longer mudguard that Mudhugger make. Pretty much just try and keep this thing on all year round really, whether it's dry or wet, because when you're racing enduro we could go to Italy in a few weeks time and it could be bone dry and dusty, but there may be bits of track that have puddles on the track or wet sections, who knows, might be a river crossing, and then the water sprays up in your goggles, and then if dust gets on that then it's like just causes a nightmare. So just try and keep a mudguard on for pretty much all year round, whether it's wet or dry, just for again that whole extra precaution or security, I guess. This is the longer one yet, and it's not made much movement at all. Fork seals as well, so we've got some Enduro fork seals. These aren't made by Fox, these are made by a company called SKF, and they just help keep the dust out of the fork a little bit better. You could argue that they sit tighter on the stanchion, so whether they're not as smooth as Fox's seals, who knows. Again, I'm trying to set this bike up so it will get through a race or get through a race season with minimal maintenance, because last thing you want really is to have a bike that is really lightweight and fancy, but then it breaks like in the first stage of a race, and then you're trying to fight to get back, trying to fix your bike all weekend, which is not what we want at all. So that's pretty much the setup of the bike. Now we'll move on to the stuff that I would carry in a race. So I am a rider that likes to carry things on my bike. I'm not a big fan of wearing backpacks if I don't have to, but I don't mind wearing a backpack. So we've got a nice one-up pump on here, which is just basically a handy pump which has got Presta and Schrader in there. And these things are really cool because you can actually store things. You can actually store things in here, or you can get like an attachment so you can put an air canister on there, which is probably what I would do just to save space. That slots in there, nice and easy to get access to as well. And then we've got this, turn my bike around, you can see it better. These are quite common now. You see these are like backcountry research straps, which are basically just a strap that we use to attach things to our bike. I'll just take it off and show you what we've got on here. So obviously in an emergency we'd take this off. We've got a spare tube on there. And as I was saying before as well about the tyre insert, so if I did get a slash tyre or a hole in the tyre, I'd be reaching to my plug pretty fast. So we've got this little gadget in here, which is basically just like a plug on a little spike, and then we'd obviously just jab that into the tyre. I'm not going to do it now, but we'll just jab that into the tyre and hopefully that would plug the hole. We've also got a couple of tyre levers on there as well. I've got 3, but I'd only usually take 2 really. And on here as well, there'd usually be a CO2 canister as well. So we've pretty much got everything we need in an emergency just on one little strap. And this just literally goes on your frame. That's another thing to mention as well. So when you're thinking about setting your bike up for enduro, you want to try and think about how much time, if you're in it to actually compete and race, you want to try and think about how fast things are going to be to access. So to take this off here, to take the pump off here, it's very fast. So that means we can, save time. If we need to do something while we're in the middle of a stage, or we need to get to the end of a stage and then work on our bikes, we've got fast access to everything without spending so much time, rooting through a bag or, whatever, which is obviously wasted time. So that can be a bit of a nightmare in a race. So if you do get a puncture or something, you have to weigh up in your own head. Is it worth stopping to try and fix it on the stage? Or can you just ride it out to the finish of a stage and then finish and fix your bike when you've finished? Which is obviously why we run the rim packed inserts as well. Obviously, if we do get a puncture on the stage or we lose air out of a tyre for a say, there's a high chance we can just ride this out to the end of the stage because of the foam that's in the tyre. So that's pretty cool. As well, we've got a 710ml Camelback bottle. So Some people take a smaller bottle. I just try and take as much water as I can around the ride, even though there's going to be feed stations and river stops. It's always useful to take as much water as you can. Going back to carrying stuff as well, I wear a vest with a back plate on that's got some pockets in it. So in there we would have Allen keys, a spare derailleur hanger, we'd have a spare split link, pretty much everything we need to keep the bike going if anything does happen. And as well, another little handy tip as well, if you're carrying, like me for instance, like a back protector, or even if you're carrying a bag, it's worth taking like a couple of electrolyte tablets with you as well. So when you fill your water up, you can just drop an electrolyte tablet in your water, because, well, I'm really bad for taking electrolytes when I'm racing and riding, but when I refill my water and put a tab in, it makes me feel 10 times better to try and keep hydrated. So that's pretty much how I would set my enduro bike up for enduro racing, I guess, whether it's the EWS or it's just like a local race. Just try and keep it pretty much the same across the board. There was a bit of debate between what pedals to run. I mean, drop a comment below if you're a flat or a clip pedal rider, but I am definitely a clip pedal rider for enduro, just because I don't know, I think it's a faster pedal. I'm sure some people would argue with that, but I just think it's the pedal for when you want to go faster, really. Put your comments in below. You're a flat or a clip pedal rider. Keen to get some conversation going. So yeah, I mean, if you like the videos like this, so more in-depth stuff into specific parts about enduro racing or enduro bikes or the setup of the bike, give this video a like. Lets us know that you actually enjoy this stuff, and it helps us to show it to more people. And go to the bottom right hand corner of your screen, click subscribe. That means you'll never miss another video. And yeah, see you at the races, and hope it's been useful.